All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Consistency Corner podcast. I'm really excited for our conversation today with Camille Walker. And we're going to be talking about what it's really like to hire help in your business and at different stages, what that can look like. And I think one of the things that I know I talk a lot about with my clients and even here on the podcast some is that like your chapter 10 can't be compared to somebody else's chapter 200 or 100 or 150. So thinking about what those things can look like in different stages of the game, I think is going to be a really interesting conversation and something for companies at all levels to think about how they can do it better or how they can get more out of the hiring process and make it easier because you as the leader have to put in some work when it's time to hire. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. So Camille and I connected through a mutual friend and I was on her podcast and I'm excited to have her here today to chat through with us. So Camille, can you share with us a little bit your story, what you do? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really fun being here. I am a serial entrepreneur in the way of I don't know what I'm doing perfectly before I do it, but I figure it out as I go. So if that is your story, you're in good company. My podcast is Call Me CEO. I share stories of mothers building businesses and how they balance family life and what was the passion that kept them going with the business that they do. So that's a little background on my podcast. But professionally, what I've done through the years, I started as an educator. I was a teacher for family and consumer science education. It's basically all of those home ec classes that you may or may not have taken against your will, but also the classes that really rang true to me and found the passion for me was figuring out the passion, like you would do career path exploring or sibling arrangement, how that affected your personality, or how do you be a successful adult? And those were the classes that I wanted to teach. It was called Adult Roles, is the class that I really loved. But after doing my student teaching, I was actually working in the mortgage business and found that going from a very female dominant education space to then a business, mortgage, finance, sales, very male dominant space, I found that I actually loved education with finance and helping people reach their goals with getting into a home. And I love people. Like it just all came together where, this is so fun. 2008 hits, we hit the recession and I get let go of my job. It changed hands with what bank owned what bank, I think 5 different times. And that same year, I found out that I was pregnant with my first child. So that was 2008. And then from there, I decided I wanted to start sharing basically everything I would have been teaching in a classroom, but I brought it online. So My Mommy Style was born, and I've been doing that for 12 years. And through the course of that time, I've worked with big time sponsors, content creation. I've been through all different social medias. We started as a team. It whittled down to one. But then I realized through the years, I needed to hire team members so that I could keep growing my business in the way that I wanted to. And now I am a coach, a podcaster. I am a blogger, a content creator, and also I help teach women how to build their own virtual assistant businesses in strategy with entrepreneurs that I coach who need to hire help. So I wear a lot of different hats, but it's because I've been able to learn and train and grow in a way that I now teach other people either how to do it themselves that way and also to hire help so that they can do the things they're most passionate about.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it how you talked about that. Like you went through the evolution of like just you and then hiring a team and it being a team and then like whittling that back down as pivots were made. Because I think that's actually something I appreciate about the online space is that in the last few years, I think creators have gotten more transparent about having a team. But I mean, I would argue that 10 years ago, like we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about that there was people behind the scenes, and it would make like other women be like, oh my God, how is she doing all those things? So kind of talk to me about that. Like when you started bringing in team members and what that looked like and what that felt like. And like, did you know other people were doing that too?
Well, mine kind of happened in reverse because when I launched my podcast, I actually had 7 women all together that were doing the blog as a team. And within 6 months, this was before blogging was even really a revenue or a career path. It was just brand new in its baby squeaky stages. And within
Mhm.
6 months, 4 of those people were like, this is like a job and we're not getting paid, And so they went out pretty quick. And then there was a team of 4, 3, 2, 1, where eventually my partners went on to do different things. And so because it happened that way, I really had to fill in the gaps of what was missing, and not being able to wear every single hat and thinking, okay, well, I know I'm really good at sponsorships and working with finding creative partners, but I'm terrible at food photography. I mean, not terrible. I was okay, but it wasn't my
Mhm.
passion. And so
Yeah.
when that partner left, and that was such a big part of my blog and its success was the recipe and food, I actually taught a Facebook cooking show live for a year. And it didn't bring in extra revenue. It was actually the recipes that were made and already done on the website that I was like, okay, that's where the money is. So it was making it so I was still being creative, and it motivated me to like create new recipes. But that isn't naturally like, oh, I love being in the kitchen. That's just not my favorite thing. So now I would go to blog conferences and meet people there who would say, oh, I'm actually a food photographer, or I'm a food creator. I
Mhm.
don't have my own blog, but I do the recipes of people that have created the recipe, and then I take photos, and then I am paid for that. And I'm like, what?
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly what I need. And so it was kind of like I went through this stage, and this is something that you unpeel. And that's actually what I help people do in their businesses is just because you're good at doing something doesn't mean that you should be the one doing it, especially if you don't love it. Because what can happen is your passion can be stripped from you of like growing the business in the direction you really want to, and kind of that golden handcuff of like, well, I know this needs to be done and I can do it, so I'll just do it. And that's what happens in the beginning, especially as an entrepreneur. You have to wear all the hats because you don't have revenue to feed back into developing the team or having a freelancer or whatever the thing is. So that's a process that you go through of figuring out what are you good at, but also what do you love doing. And it's almost like a grid system where you can go through it and say, what am I good at and what do I love to do? What am I good at and not like to do? What am I bad at and hate doing? And what am I bad at but I like doing? And then you can kind of categorize that and figure out what things you can siphon off first, where you can make that momentum forward as you bring new people in.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love what you talked about in that, like, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you have to do it. Like, yes, it has to be done. You can do it, but someone else can do it for you, but that you have to do it yourself for a while.
Yeah.
And I was just talking to a business owner earlier today on a discovery call, and she was like, I'm seeing all of these strategies and all of these things that I can do in terms of content, but like, I didn't start my business to create content. I started my business to help people. And I was like, I know. And she's like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, you have to do it for a while. And I said, and eventually when you have that revenue coming in and you're spending more of your time helping people and serving people, you can outsource your content. But honestly, as somebody who creates content for other businesses, I can tell you, you creating that content, even if you don't think it's good, gives you a leg up when you're ready to hire, because now all of that information is out of your head and on paper or digitally on a screen, so that those content creators who do this like professionally can take what you've done and run with it versus them
Yes.
trying to like read your mind and start from scratch.
Yeah, really developing that voice of who you're talking to, what the problem is that you're solving, how do you relay that information, what are your core values, what are the pillars you want to be speaking to. That it's all very important. It's also important to realize what things of my business are moving the needle of income that allow me to expand and grow in the way that I want to moving forward. Because sometimes it's easy to get stuck in looking around and seeing what other people say needs to be done, where in your business, that may not be making any difference at all in your actual revenue and your ability to grow your business. And so I think doubling down on, really and sometimes it takes an outside perspective of someone looking at your business who isn't biased to it and saying, oh,
Mhm.
well, according to the numbers, this is what is actually making a dent in your growth or in your revenue or in the direction you want to be headed. So I think that is a really important piece is if you have a good friend, a mentor, a coach, someone that can help you to make that momentum forward is really important in deciding what things are most important to do and what things can wait.
Yes. Or what to do first versus second versus third. Like I see people, they're like, I know I need to do all these things, but like, oh my gosh, where do I start? And we get this like analysis paralysis or decision paralysis and freeze and we do nothing.
Perfectionism, procrastination. We all do it. I think it's easy. Sometimes when I get into, let's say that I'm trying to create content for Instagram, for example, I'm actually looking to hire someone I've had people who have helped me with posting content creation before, which is great. But what I really want and I'm craving right now is someone to come to my house and for us to film 20 bits of content and for me to send it and not have to think about it again. And so what I really help people to do is create systems so that, for example, as soon as I'm done recording a podcast episode for my podcast, I send it to an assistant who does transcripts, social creation, edits the podcast and puts it up and on the blog as well. And it's once I've done it, I don't have to think about it again until that episode has gone live. And then I talk about it in my stories and share it to a few other places. So I think it's really interesting to think about what is that sticking point for you? What is that perfection paralysis? And for a lot of people, it is with recording video, where I feel like it isn't that I even feel like there is a huge push for creating content with your likeness, especially if you have like a coaching or a personal brand where you need to put yourself out there. And sometimes even if you have a buddy that you can partner up and do that together and kind of work through that, it doesn't have to be perfect to be worth doing. And I think that we get stuck in perfection sometimes of like, oh, I didn't say that quite right, or oh, my hair wasn't quite right, or my makeup or whatever. And so if you can schedule a time to just hammer it out with someone, that's what I'm working on right now myself. I got all of these applications like, oh, I want to work with you. I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, which that's what I help set up virtual assistants all day, every day. That's part of my business. But I want someone physically to come to my house. And so that's something specifically where I know for me, that will give me the motivation to be dressed and have my hair done and to time block a certain amount of time that I know is devoted to that specific part of my business that I can tag team with someone. And that energy to me, I know with my personality is so much more fun that I'll be like, okay, what's next? And it kind of gamifies it a little bit more than like, oh no, like turn reverse camera, like I need to get this shot and do this thing or whatever. For me, that makes it more fun. So I think that it's really taking into account your personality and also your budgeting, like what can you afford so that it's attractive for a team member to join you. And there are specific steps I take people through. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself of when it is time to hire someone. So I'll stop there so you can ask me maybe some other questions that lead up to that.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said about like processes. And I think that like having those processes and steps documented before it's time to hire, like that sounds like that's something that you as a business owner really need to think through so that then when it becomes like, okay, I think I'm ready to outsource, I have some budget, you're not asking somebody to come in and still fulfill a role and they're like trying to read your mind with what you want and how you want it done, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's important that you do it first so that you know the sticking points, you know the way that you want it to look or to feel or to sound like, whether it's the copy that is someone's reading or the way visually something is looking. It's really important that you are in the trenches, so to speak, in that development process so that it's an easy transfer of this is what I know works for me and what I like. Not that you're not open to different things, but that it's much easier to relay what it is that you want and know what you're looking for so that that voice is already established and that it's bringing someone in instead of going and saying, I don't know, where do I start? Which is actually what I help coach people through is like, what is it that you would want to offload first? And let's go through a time audit and figure where are your sticking points? Where are you wasting time? Do you doom scroll? Are you wasting time in email? Are you losing yourself in Facebook when you go to do a response, but then now you're reading about some random celebrity or, I don't know. But I think that if we do a time audit, that's a really good place to look at how we are spending our time in our days too. It's defining who you're speaking to, but it's also having a really clear understanding of how you're using your time, because that can be a huge part of knowing if it's time to hire someone new and if that's something that you're ready for or you're needing.
Yeah. You said something earlier about brand values, and it made me think about, I was having a conversation with a friend inside of a mentor group recently, and she had brought on an assistant to help her with some things. And she was like, I feel like I haven't been super clear and upfront about my expectations. And one of those expectations is like quality over quantity and quality over speed. And it got me thinking of like, I'm totally different. Like, I'm like, take fast action, messy action. Let's get it out there. We can always tweak down the road. And it just like made me think like, that's a conversation that you would never need to have with yourself, but you bring somebody in to represent your brand or your business. And you want to have that type of conversation of like, what is the expectation? Is the expectation quality over speed, or is the expectation speed over quality, and get it done? So even reflecting on those types of values and how you want your brand to show up in the marketplace so that you can communicate that effectively as you bring team members on, I think is really important, kind of like pre-work to do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a questionnaire. I mean, if you look, you've heard of people say like identifying your ideal avatar, which is, or your ideal client, or there are many different ways of saying this. But if you can take yourself through an exercise, you can Google this if you want to, but there are questions where you can identify your ideal client or your ideal avatar and go through that practice first and kind of really do some reflection about what are those core values? What is the problem you're hoping to solve for this person? What are some things that you can do to help them so that you have a very clear understanding of who you're talking to? And then you can share that document with the person you're hiring. And it's a really quick, it's kind of like a speed dating, like get to know someone, but it's getting to know the client. And you can say, hey, I've already done this outline of who it is I'm talking to and what I'm trying to do for this person. And that can really help clarify that messaging.
Yeah, for sure. So Camila, I'd love to get your perspective on hiring when it comes to a employee versus a contractor, or a freelancer, because I think the world of freelancing and contractors has definitely increased since COVID, since Great Resignation. Things are happening differently. I'm actually was just having a conversation with another agency owner that like the Mom Project, which was a great job search platform for families, just launched like a freelance service, freelance platform. So as a business owner, if you're thinking about hiring, what are some considerations that you might want to think about for employee versus a contractor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I've only ever hired contractors because I am looking for a very specific skill set and someone that is working flexible hours of their own, because I'm working out of my own home. And I'm not in a situation where I want to have the overhead of, benefits and paid time off and sick leave and HR and all of that extra stuff, which is fantastic. If you're in the place where you can do that and you're at a high enough level of revenue that makes sense for you, that's fantastic. For me, being an online business owner and having different platforms that I'm working with, my needs can change based on, as a mom, if I'm pushing or pulling back on my business or if I'm launching something new. In fact, it was a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, when I launched my podcast and started a new website, CamilleWalker.co, when I was starting my coaching, my podcasting, and my VA coaching business platform, the 60 Days to VA. And so at that time, it was a huge part where I needed to hire someone to build a new website for me. I needed to set up Kajabi and a course breakdown and videos and uploading new assets. And it was probably 6 solid months of bringing in it was launching a new business essentially, because my blog was still being sustained in other ways and it was still functioning, but I was creating this new baby. And so I had people that I brought on that I needed to pay weekly for months, where after 6 months was done and I was up and running with my podcast, my coaching, and my course, I didn't need that anymore. And so what's really cool too is if you establish relationships with people that do that kind of work. In fact, I just hired the same person who built my site 3 years ago. I messaged her last night and said, hey, I want to create a special page for my new Facebook groups for my CEOs and my virtual assistants. Can you help put up new page references for that and this job form and this, that, and the other? And she's like, yeah, let's do a 5-hour package. Boom, we're done. And that relationship is already established and that trust is there. And so for me, contracted work, even if it's month to month, I have people that manage SEO or Pinterest or Facebook growth management, different things like that. And those are represented by different individuals who that is their specialty. And so, but again, it's on a contracted freelance basis. And that's what's worked best for me. I think that there's a lot less risk legally when you do it that way, because you're not having to worry about the guidelines of like hiring and firing are not as rigid. I don't think it's more flexible to, as your needs change, what that looks like. And I have helped some of my virtual assistants who have graduated from my course who have been hired on as a full-time employee. So sometimes people that are first hired as a contractor, you may be like, gosh, this person, I do not want to let them go. I want them to be this, that, or the other with me for forever. And that's great too. Like, I think that it's something that can grow into that space, which is amazing.
Yeah, those are all really good considerations. And I just, I asked the question because like coming from a corporate environment, we almost exclusively hired people. And then every once in a while, like there was some agency partners or contractors that I would bring in from a marketing department. Like we brought in an SEO specialist, we brought in a paid ad specialist, but we would always have that conversation of like, well, what if we just hired somebody? And it's just, there's different things to weigh. There's that cost, there's that value. And I think also to your point, like those relationships, like a contractor actually allows you to establish a relationship, get to know the person, and then you can decide like, does this work best for them to stay as a contractor and we can, continue a relationship that way? Or does it make sense for me to make them an offer, to your point, if you really don't want to lose them and it's an ongoing project or ongoing role versus like a one-time project or one-time role. But the thing is to like, we talked about this earlier, not comparing your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 10 or somebody else's chapter 100. So like not comparing yourself to even your competition, because you don't know the whole backstory. You don't know why other people are making the decisions that they're making. And so you've got to figure out what makes the most sense for you and for your business.
Absolutely. And again, depending on what kind of structuring you're working with or what kind of help you need, I think that if you are in a place, and my husband has said this to me many times, he's like, I think you're at a place where you need someone to come in and be working with you every day. And I'm like, yeah, like that could be cool. Like physically be here with me. I've never had that. I've always been kind of a solopreneur in that case once I lost my business partners years ago. And so the idea of having that energy of someone with me is really fun. I like that. But I also structure and theme my days where I'm not working every single day, 9 to 5. I do I do heavier days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But because I run my business the way that I do, I want flexibility. I don't want to be beholden to someone else's schedule in that way. That's why I became an entrepreneur in the first place. So I think you really need to take a step back and decide, is it something where you want someone to physically be with you every day, or you want to know that they're working on your thing every single day, which right now I have someone that's working for me for 20 hours, but she does it at her own time. And I have people that work for me that are in the States, and I have people that work for me that are outside of the States. And I think that there is space for both of those to exist depending on what the skill set is or what work you need help with. So it is so individual. And that's why it's really cool to get someone involved in that. If that's actually something I coach people through, is to help them figure out what they need and how much help they need and how to use a virtual assistant successfully so that it feels like it's worth your time. I know I've had a lot of people in the past who said, oh, I hired someone, but it was horrible. The communication was bad. I didn't even know how to use them. I didn't know if I could trust the person. There's a lot of like questions and, oh, this is my baby, and a lot of like, closed fist approach. And so that's where people who have been through my course, and I match them up with virtual or with entrepreneurs who need help, they're vetted and awesome. And it's worked out really well.
Yeah, for sure. That whole idea of like somebody being there right next to you, like there is power in that. I'm
Totally.
not gonna like deny that there is
Yeah.
power in sharing physical space with somebody that's even different than a Zoom call.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to like your brand values, like I can speak to that. Like I'm the same way. Like I started my business so that I had the flexibility to go on school field trips, pick my kiddo up at school if he was sick, do the like lunchtime with your parent thing.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to give that same experience and flexibility to other moms, because
Yes.
I had such a hard time finding it. And so like that's the vision for the brand. And so thinking about those visions, those long-term big pictures, like why do you do what you do, I think is such a great reminder before we make hiring decisions. The other question I wanted to ask you, and this kind of came up as you mentioned you called yourself a solopreneur. And I think it's really interesting the language we use as business owners to identify ourselves. And I think there's slight nuance differences in solopreneur versus business owner versus company versus, CEO. Your podcast, Call Me CEO. Can you talk a little bit about those different titles and how you have worn those different hats or tried on different titles and what that's felt like for you in terms of like really owning your role as a CEO?
Yeah, I like that you asked that, because sometimes I don't think that people know why I called my podcast Call Me CEO. And the thing was, I was in a forum on Facebook, and it was a group of women entrepreneurs. And we were talking about if people liked the terms mom boss or mompreneur or mommy blogger, which is what I was called a lot and still am in some circumstances when I've been at like these big executive things, with Disney or Walmart or I can't even name them all because there's so many. And they were using the term mommy blogger, which is fine. But these are amazing women who have built these incredible businesses. And so to me, I was in this one forum, this woman was lamenting, don't call me a mom boss. Don't call me a mompreneur. Call me CEO, because that's what I am. And I'm like, yes. So that was the energy. That's where the name came from. Because I think it's interesting, as I've interviewed so many women over the last few years, almost 3 years, that you can have a woman who is making $5,000 a month and a woman who is making $250,000 a month or more. And I've had them tell me, I don't know that I consider myself a CEO. And I'm just like, what? Like, major eye roll, but also with frustration to say, you are a CEO of your life and your business. And as a mother, you are the CEO of the ship of life. Like I haven't met any woman where I've thought, oh, they're really not they're really just kind of a slug, like they're just slugging around. No, like women are making it happen, whether you're working inside the home, outside the home, you're a stay-at-home mom, not working in either capacity, inside or outside. Like it is work being a woman. And so to me, I wear that as a badge, like call me CEO. So yeah, to that term of like, what is that language? I think that stepping into what it is that we're calling ourselves and the language we use, even in reference to ourselves or our business or what we bring to the table, is important. And words have power. And so I think it's also interesting to hear my husband talk about how it was so hard for him to work from home during COVID. And he's an executive of a law firm, and he calls the shots. A lot of employees are, he's the guy. He's the guy that people come to. He's in charge. And he said, man, I cannot believe how lonely I was working from home and how hard it was to be motivated to like get things done. And also just how depressing it was to not get out and like put new clothes on and like take the shower and go out for the day. And I was just reflecting on
Mhm.
that and kind of had to laugh a little bit because I've never had that. You know, when I was building my business with 4 kids at home, it has always been me. And it's always been me having to motivate myself enough to show up and do the work, even though I didn't have someone asking or telling me or showing me how. And so COVID for me was also really, um, what's the right word? It was like, I felt, oh, I want to know what word I'm trying to think of. It was like, not vindication or like, I
Like
felt like I
validating.
say what word? Validating.
Was it like it's
Yes.
validating?
Yes. It was just like, oh my gosh, like this is so hard for the rest of the world, which obviously there was a lot else going on. But like
Mhm.
people who are doing it and making it happen when other people aren't telling them what to do and you just have to do the thing, like it is hard work. And you are a CEO. So for me, that is a huge piece of it. And I think that it's that time, it's that chapter, it's giving in that daily grind and showing up and doing 1 to 3 things to move your business forward every single day. And that takes dedication. And so if you're doing that and you are showing up despite any odds, like I applaud you. I think that I just actually got back from Ernst and Young's Entrepreneur of the Year award event. It was held in Palm Springs, California. And the people that won, they elect a group of people from each area of the country. So they even had people there from London, quite a few. And then there's like a world competition for these entrepreneurs of the year. And oh my gosh, it was like Candyland for me because of course doing what I do and interviewing the people that I do, I love hearing people's stories. I love celebrating what the passion was that had them building that business, how they were able to grow it, what the hardships were. And they had these people coming up on stage that were nominees and award winners. And it was so incredible to hear the amount of stories of people almost losing so many times. You listen to stories of like how Nike was built or even Elon Musk or even like I could think of any business in the world. And there are so many times when like they almost lost everything, but they kept going and pushed through it. And we are no different. Like
Mhm.
it might be at a different scale and it won't be as world renowned, but having hardship is part of the journey and that's normal. And so is growth. And so when people think about hiring out and growing the team in whatever capacity that is, it's going to be scary. Like it's going to be putting faith into the process of growing whatever it is that you're doing and believing in yourself enough to bring other people in. And that's a journey. That's part of it. And you can't grow unless you ask for that help or you expand in that way. And I think that is so empowering to learn from other people who have been through that and to learn stories of other people who have done that as well.
Yeah. And that not only is like failure part of the journey, but like retraction doesn't always mean failure. And you might bounce back. Like
Mm-hmm.
that, like resilience. Like I love stories of
Yes.
that because
Yes.
you're in the weeds day to day and like something happens, you lose a client, a launch doesn't go the way you want it to, your revenue is retracting. You're like, oh my God, I'm failing. But like, no, it's the resilience to like keep going and keep doing the work and keep putting in the moments and the effort to get back to where you were and then potentially even farther, and learning from all of those things. Like I do a word of the year every year, and it's kind of like my focus going into the next year. And I've been considering actually resilient as my word for 2024.
Oh, I love that word. We had one of my favorite sessions that I went to at the conference was on how to build resilience and how important
Mhm.
resilience is to having a business and being an entrepreneur and really to be a human. I think about resilience and how I teach my kids or how I hope to teach my kids resilience all of the time. And really resilience can't be developed unless there is a hardship. It's like people talk about climbing mountains. And if you climbed a smooth mountain, you would slide right down. You have to have those boulders to get over and reach the top. And that takes hard work. And that takes falling down and realizing I am capable of getting back up. And it may not look exactly the way I had hoped, but it will be even better looking back because you can have that experience to help someone else do the same.
Yes. Oh my gosh, you would love. I just listened to a couple weeks ago a podcast episode with Dr. Becky. She's Dr. Becky Good Inside on Instagram. She's the author of the book called Good Inside. And she had a conversation with Reese Witherspoon all about resilience and like teaching our kids resilience. And it was such a good conversation about like letting our kids fail because we are going to fail in life. And it's not like preventing the failure, but it's teaching the bounce back from the failure and being able to sit in the failure and be comfortable with it because it's gonna happen again.
Yeah, it's funny you say Reese Witherspoon. She was actually one of the headliner speakers at the event. And she sat right in front of me.
Cool.
Yeah, I didn't get to shake her hand, but she waved hi at me. I said hi, and she went hi. So that's my claim to fame. I know.
That's
yeah,
so fun.
But she is such a good example of that because she could have easily sat back and said, I'm a successful actress. This is enough for me. But she talked a lot about how as a kid, she actually would sell hair barrettes in her class. And she told her brother, she's like, if we personalize these and put people's names on them, we could charge $1. And she's like, and we did, and we made so much money. And she's like, and then I got called to the principal's office because apparently you can't run a business out of a classroom. But I think that if you have that calling or that draw within you to be an entrepreneur, there's a reason for that. And I think there's so much fun that can be learned from the things that go well for people and also the things that are hard. And she is such a good example of that because she went on to be, doing her book club and being a director and a producer and an actress and a businesswoman. And oh my gosh, she is absolutely brilliant. I think she has so much going for her. And I'm so grateful that she shows up and shares the vulnerability with the things that she's been able to do.
Yeah. And I'm sure as a woman who was an actress and pretty successful at a young age, like she could have sat back and just been like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. I'm just supposed to be like the pretty actress. And like, I'm sure stepping into those roles as a producer and owning a production company and all of those things, like that was probably super scary.
Yeah.
When she had success in other areas and even knowing that like, I'm going to step out and take a risk and do something that might fail, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yes. And you know what she said about this? And this was like, I was screaming inside from the rooftops, like, yes, because she was talking about how she had always been a good reader. She's like, I know my strength is in being a good reader and knowing when a book is going to be a success. But I don't know. I didn't go to business school. I didn't know how to make my movie production company actually profitable. I didn't go to school for that. And so after I had done the first few movies, we were able to cover our costs, but we weren't making money on top of that. And so she said, I needed to hire someone who did. And that's when I went and found these other people, and she named them specifically. And she said they were great at that strategy. They did know how to make the profit. And I hired people to do things that I wasn't good at doing. And that's the whole point of growing your business is you know what your strengths are, you identify them, and then you say, okay, to grow from here, who are the people or what are the pieces of my business that I need to grow? And that's how you're successful.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Mic drop. That's so good. So good. I love it. I'm so glad you shared that story and that came up about Reese Witherspoon. And to wrap up our conversation, I've got 3 questions that we always wrap with to get to know our guests a little bit more. So I want to ask you, we've talked a little bit about brand values today, but I would love to know what is one of your brand values and how you landed on that.
Well, for myself personally, learning has always been a core value for me. We talked about how I was an educator and education is a big piece of my business, but a bigger and most important piece is family. I'm really big on creating a balance in your life as a woman so that you can create time for the relationships in your life. I don't think any one of us will look back and think, gosh, I really wish I would have launched that extra XYZ or made that extra 100,000. We're going to look back and think, man, I wish I would have, or I treasure that time that I had with my children or with my spouse, and we made sure to make this a part of our day or our week or our month. It's not in those like big extravagant things. It's in our day-to-day connections. And so connection is probably my number one. And then giving women specifically mothers, the tools to be able to do that for themselves. That's why I created 60 Days to VA. It wasn't because I love the world of virtual assistant work. It was because I had women coming to me and saying, I want to work from home too. How can I do that? And then having women on the other side saying, you're growing this business. How are you able to do that? And the answer to both was virtual assisting. One person can create their own business and the other person can hire them. And that kind of created that ability to connect that value piece of time with the people who matter most to you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Well, along with our conversation on values, I always like to ask about personal development because, like growth and learning is a value of yours, personal development and a growth mindset is one of my values. So I'd love to know, what is one of your favorite personal development books? And if you're like me and you can't pick a favorite, something that you've read recently that resonated with you.
Oh my gosh. Can we be friends? Because I listen to books all the time. I am obsessed with books. I love memoirs. Like I said, I like hearing from people's personal stories. I would say one of my favorite self-development books is probably Atomic Habits. That's a big one that I listen to time and time again, just reflecting on. And one that I listened to recently was actually Tiny Habits, which they could be sister books. And I mean that by saying, how do you develop small incremental changes in your day to make the big changes that you hope to make in your life? So those would probably be my top two for self-development. But and another one is that I listen to time and time again is Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty, who just actually happened to be a guest at the Strategic Growth Forum that I was at last week too. So I was fangirling big time because I love how his approach is really about mindfulness of being present and, again, connecting with yourself and the people that you love. And how are you doing that? And how are you framing your thoughts for growth? And so those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, I love Jay Shetty and his story. I mean, his podcast in general, and he shares little snippets of his story in his podcast. But, he was a monk and then he was like, I want to help people in a different way. And, he just kept putting in the work and kept doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it led to where he is today. And the story of that pivot of I feel a different calling, where he could have just stayed a monk forever. And then we wouldn't have this wisdom and this, amazing content and stories and perspective that we get from him. So I love that you shared that. Well, our last question is around consistency. And I do always want to remind the listeners, especially, but our guests as well, that consistent doesn't have to mean constant. But I'd love to know something that you are really consistent with, either in your business or your personal life, that you are really proud of that consistency.
Okay, I'll give you one of each. So one thing that I love that I do consistently in my personal life is I talked about connections being really important to me. So something that I do is I call it my walk and talks, and I do them with, it can be done virtually with someone on the phone or with someone in person. And walking and being outdoors is it's very fundamental for my mental health. Like I feel closer to God and more in tune with myself when I spend time outdoors. And I also love I think they say that walking or exercising is the washing machine of the mind. And so I think that it's really important to have relationships where you can walk and talk through the big things and mundane things, where you're taking time to connect and also to listen. And so that's a thing I've been consistent with that I am really proud of. Another thing with my business, I'm really proud of creating systems in my business that allow me to be consistent, even when I'm not necessarily there every day. So for example, that might mean building something that creates SEO, whether that's a website or my pins on Pinterest or having a book on Amazon. I really that I've established pieces of my business that once I created it, it can continue to make money. And it's been slow and I've been building it progressively over time. But my Time for Us journals is a parent and child journal that I built for parents to have connection with their kids. And I have a new version of that coming out in this week, actually. And I'm really proud of that because that is a piece around connection that's really important to me too. So I'd probably say that.
Yeah. I love that. That's so awesome. And I love the walk and talk. I actually have been doing that with the girlfriend recently. Once a week, we schedule a call to do a walk and talk. And you're right. Like, it's such a great way to get away from your computer screen, to get your body moving, to connect with a person, feed your relationship health, feed your physical health, and feed your spiritual health being outside. So I love that you make that a priority and do that really consistently as well. That's awesome. Well, Camille, this was such a fun conversation. We probably could have chatted for hours. Let our listeners know where they can connect with you, where you hang out online, and where they can learn more about what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun. If you're a podcast listener, which I think you are, you can find me at Call Me CEO, that anywhere that podcasts are. If you are looking for help with parenting, recipes, travel, anything around the lifestyle of motherhood, mymommystyle.com is my website for that. And then on socials, I am CamilleWalker.co on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. So you can find me there. And that's also my website, CamilleWalker.co, for help with coaching, or if you want to be a virtual assistant or you want to hire a virtual assistant, that's where you'll find me there.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for being here. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.